Welcome back to Builders of the Broken Bazaar. I'm your host, Dr. Tabish Zaman. Now, on this podcast, we have got used to talking about entrepreneurship as freedom. We often talk about it as mobility or as choice. But this particular narrative only holds if people are actually allowed to participate in the market. Because talent alone has never been enough. What actually matters is the access, the infrastructure, and more importantly, in today's time, the power, the political power which decides whose futures are seen as possible at all. In Palestine, young people are often spoken about through crisis as a humanitarian problem which are to be managed rather than professional strategists, designers, and builders with something to offer the world. And the numbers matter here. Now, some of the things which have been given to me, I don't know if it makes sense in the current times, but the youth employment in Gaza, what are we talking about? In the West Bank, again, consistently above 25%. Not because in those parts of the world people aren't skilled, but because economies are fragmented. We all know how movement is restricted and access to global market is structurally blocked. And what gets erased in this framing is the capability of those individuals, the ambition, and the quite everyday work of trying to build a life with dignity inside systems designed to interrupt continuity. Now, this matters because work isn't neutral. Work is all about identity. It is about agency, and work is one of the few ways people can insist on a future when politics keeps obstructing it. And this is where I bring remote and digital work, which is framed globally in the current times, in times of AI, as convenience, as flexibility, as lifestyle. But again, if we go back to Palestine, in places like that, it becomes something else entirely. When physical movement is restricted, digital work has become a sort of the bridge into the global labor market, a way of staying economically viable, a refusal to accept that geography should determine that possibility. And my guest today, she understands this not as a theory, but as a lived practice. She has spent over a decade inside global markets, crafting brands, building growth systems, and scaling tech startups across US, Europe, and in the MENA region, learning firsthand how opportunities distribute. In 2020, she made a deliberate decision to move her work to Palestine. There, working inside the local tech and innovation ecosystem, she recognized something very, very critical. That talent was not the problem. Skills were not the problem. The problem was access. Access to client, to trust, to international grade marketing pathways that allows work to be judged on performance and politics. And instead of responding with another training program, another short-term invention, she chose to build infrastructure. Olives and Heather, it began as a solo consultancy. It has since grown into a full-scale Palestinian marketing agency delivering end-to-end marketing lead and sales funnel system for global impact and innovation businesses across Middle East, Europe, and the United States. But the ambition was never just the client delivery. At its core, Olives and Heather uses access to global markets as a vehicle for something deeper. It creates meaningful digital jobs for Palestine and cultivating new generation of marketing strategists whose work is measured by excellence, not just sympathy. It is not outsourced, dressed up as ethics. It is entrepreneurship as infrastructure, which is what this podcast is all about, as a system building, as a refusal to accept exclusion as inevitable. So this episode is not about marketing tactics. It's all about work as dignity, about entrepreneurship under constraint, and about what it really means to build future in a world that keeps deciding who is allowed to have one. Kathrine Tinggaard Nicolaisen, welcome to Builders of the Broken Bazaar.
Thank you.
So, Kathrine, before we get into Alice and Heather, before we start talking about entrepreneurship as intervention, I believe this was a very personal decision. You built your career across London, Berlin, Amsterdam, all these spaces where markets quite rightly worked for you. But can you take us back to 2020, to the moment you decided, okay, got to move to Palestine? What did you encounter in those first months, and what made it possible to keep seeing work, talent, and opportunity in the same way again?
I might have to take you back just a wee bit further. It already started in 2018 when I visited Palestine the first time. I was visiting my brother who was studying at Hebrew University, and I was there over Christmas and New Year's. And I thought I was going to see a country where some people were in disagreement over a land dispute, but that it was two equal parties. And what I saw from the very first moment was not like that at all. We're talking military occupation, checkpoints, movement of humans that feels almost unsuitable for animals, and just a general lack of opportunities and gray concrete walls and violence in a way that I'm not used to in Europe. Growing up in Denmark, you're used to crossing borders to neighboring countries without even seeing a police officer, let alone a gun. So to see weapons and the army deployed at any given time is a scary and overwhelming feeling. So it made me question a lot of things. I was not informed about Palestine before that. I went home and started doing a lot of research. And first I thought, okay, I'm a marketeer. What can I do to support the Palestinian context with the skills that I have? Like, how can I make a difference? And I started in the civil society space. I looked mostly at e-commerce and different artists and designers and anyone in the cultural space to see what can I do to help amplify storytelling and maybe help small businesses grow and sell products. And that's how everything really started. I did that for about a year remotely from Amsterdam, where I was living at the time. And then I got the opportunity to move to Palestine in January 2020. So I quit my job, I sublet my flat, and I went there thinking, okay, this is what I'll be doing the next 3 to 6 months. And then everything sort of just snowballed from there. I started in the art and culture space, but then after 6 months, I realized with all the obstacles, whether we're talking financial transactions, access to raw materials, ability to ship or even provide people with the typical customer experience that they're used to when we're talking global e-commerce, all of these factors made me feel that it's very, very challenging to build a traditional product-based brand in Palestine. So I kind of went back to my roots. I've always worked in the tech space in London, Berlin, and Amsterdam, like you said. So I started looking at what can I do in that space where we kind of overcome those restrictions because it's digital services that are deployed online and people can work from wherever. And that's when I came across Gaza Sky Geeks. I already knew them before. I had a boss when I worked in Berlin who'd helped them with a crowdfunding campaign in 2016. So I feel like the stars just aligned. I started working with them as brand and communications manager. That also became my gateway to Gaza, where I spent roughly a year. And after working with them for a bit less than 2 years, I decided to start on my own. And then it all just kind of went from there. I started with basically being a solopreneur and independent consultant working with Palestinian startups. And then as I saw that there was a demand also for execution, that's when I really started thinking about, well, maybe my mandate is not just to help other businesses grow and hire people. I could also hire people and build a company with a culture that I actually appreciate. I think anyone who's worked in agency culture in any place in the world can recognize that it can be a very toxic work environment. And in Palestine, it's no different. And the reality for Palestinian talent is that, as you mentioned, the youth unemployment is crazy high. I think we don't have a clue how bad it is right now. The latest reports, at least the official latest reports, would have been prior to 7th of October 23. And back then, we were talking 50 to 70% of young people being unemployed, despite of them being highly skilled. So I saw that there was talent. I witnessed it firsthand. when interviewing on behalf of clients to help them find people to work with them. I saw it in the co-working spaces that I would frequent. And I also saw it in the training programs organized by Gaza Sky Geeks and other ecosystem builders. So from there, things just started evolving. I knew that we can do something when it comes to helping the local ecosystem. I can do something when it comes to creating jobs, and I can do something in terms of challenging the narrative and working on perception internationally. And after 7th of October, the big focus has really just been creating jobs. And for better or for worse, I have more of an opportunity to land international clients than an all Palestinian team would. And I'm trying to do my best to put that to good use and bring exciting projects internationally that are both paying a decent wage for the team, but also providing them with challenges and opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access.
That's quite a journey, isn't it, Catherine? And to this, what you just took us through, I've got a very small sort of a follow up in terms of how I look at it. Of course, first thing is the journey, what sort of incubation period, you made it like sort of gave us a story, gave us an overview of what it is. And again, made it very simplistic that way. But I'm pretty sure that incubation period where you took all these decisions and you went back and, these are very brave decisions for someone like yourselves coming from Europe, trying to. So I think there is a lot going on here. So what was that incubation period like for you when you were setting yourself up to do something as big as this?
I think it's just deeply ingrained in me to be driven by social justice since I was a child. Like before you even have a clear sense of self-identity, I've always been someone who would speak up against things that I did not agree with. And I've been quite active in youth politics in Denmark before I moved to London to study. So it's just always been part of who I am. So in that sense, it does not feel like bravery or a big step. But after leaving university, like I entered university very hopeful and honestly quite entrepreneurial. But then leaving, I had all these weird arbitrary benchmarks for what success looks like that in no way aligns with how I actually view myself or my path. And within 5 years, I had achieved most of those in terms of title, in terms of pay, in terms of position. But I was looking around at myself thinking, what is this? Like this in no way aligns with my own self view or what I thought I would be doing with my life. And I was really looking to do something quite different when this whole Palestine awakening happened. And then when it comes to Palestine specifically, I think many people that begin a journey relating to Palestine find it very hard to just stop someday. Everyone that I met at Gaza Sky Geeks, they are still very involved with the Palestinian cause in whatever shape and form they're able to. Palestine deserves everything we can give it. And for some people, that's a period of time when maybe you're on maternity leave or maybe be in between jobs or a few hours here and there. But for other people, it becomes a lifestyle and it's hard to just walk away from it. So for me, it's a duty and not just a desire. And I also know and see that some of the things I'm doing, there's not necessarily somebody who could come and take my place if I was to step down. So on a bad day, I'm very driven by what I'm trying to do and the vision and drive of the team. But on the good days, you feel like you're flying because you really see the difference that you're making. I don't feel like it's been that difficult. The difficult part has been more about managing your emotions throughout because it is very challenging to be in Palestine. Even before 7th of October, it was a very hard circumstance, and the conditions that you're there under, even the most privileged people, they're very challenging and you make a lot of sacrifices. You miss out on a lot of family affairs. Like for me personally, not being fully present when my sister-in-law had breast cancer, not being there when my granddad, who was almost a second father to me, passed away, missing big birthdays and weddings and different activities. Like that's part of it, but you make that sacrifice. I can't say with joy, but you make it willingly because you know that you're privileged and that the day that you don't want to do this anymore, you can walk away. But the people that I work with don't have that choice.
Which is why I feel, Catherine, you are an inspiration that way, where you bring your work and your individuality, and but I believe you're a marketing, you understand marketing more than most of us here. How do you see brand then? I mean, what's your view on the word branding of yourself, your firm, and when Palestine comes calling, and, things which are happening? I've met so many people around, they're so conscious about what they say, what they do. And again, here we are bringing our entire self to Palestine, like you said, personal sacrifices, professional sacrifices. So what's your take as a marketing individual when we talk about branding in such an environment?
I've always worked with startups, and I feel like you can be yourself in that kind of environment. And there's a lot of room for individuality and different opinions. So I don't think I've ever really felt a fear to speak up about what I believe in my workplace. So I don't recognize or fully understand what people working in corporate environments are going through when they're being silenced. Obviously, for me, sitting in Palestine, it can be hard to understand how it's so provocative to even mention the word Palestine. But at the end of the day, for myself, the route that I've taken, I've always had to be very careful about how I communicate about Palestine. And anyone reading anything I write on LinkedIn will find that I'm telling my story. I'm sharing the experiences of the people that I'm around. It's not a political analysis. It's not a historical account. It doesn't mean that I'm not aware about the past or have opinions on what is happening. But I think the best way to really communicate the situation in Palestine, to make people see it and understand it, is by focusing on something that cannot be disputed, which is individual experiences. There are people that are fighting that battle and, marching ahead and disproving all of the so-called fake news and setting the record straight. And those people are very needed. But I think for anyone who's trying to get into that space and have certain feelings, the best thing you can do is to look at individuals, and Palestinians have a right to exist in their own rights without having to be defined by the situation, the context, and the people on the other side of the wall. So I don't feel the need to even mention them, their name, the government, in order to explain the Palestinian experience. So that has been my way to navigate it. But everyone is different. Some people put all their effort into behind the scenes work. They can mobilize funds, they can mobilize initiatives, they can do all sorts of work, but you won't see them be very public. And other people will be very public, but will perhaps not change as much. So I think we all have to do our parts and do whatever that looks like. But when it comes to being afraid of hurting people's feelings, I think in a work context, I get it. Some people really need the job they have and don't have other opportunities, and they don't want to burn any bridges. But I think there's also been some people being overly cautious for no reason, maybe perhaps out of a fear of being disliked. And I think we can all do with being a little bit disliked, especially by people that we ourselves don't like. So
I think that's very well put, Catherine. I think we need everyone here, all hands on deck, when we are talking about what is happening right now. I think between you and me, we can agree when it comes to Palestine, it's treated and it has been treated as a humanitarian exception, rather than now people are starting to look at it as a structural reality. Now, then you bring in your work, working day to day in Palestine. It shows how the global market functions. And again, who gets left out, who gets trusted, who gets paid, and who gets retained. So, do you think Palestine is also exposing on a very large scale as something which is broken, in front of our eyes through your own work?
something within the global economy or in the tech space specifically?
Yes, global economy, because it brings in, it's an accumulation of a lot of different things, But Palestine, for me, actually, it shows a very structural reality. It shows how things are very disconnected. It is working for some, it's not working for some, but it is exposing a lot of things. So in the global economy, from your own workspace, what's your view on what's broken and why it is so?
think Palestine is exposing just how interconnected the global economy is, even though we like to think of it as separate markets with individual workforces, and we like to create all these different boxes, but that's just not the reality on the ground. So if we talk digital economy in Palestine specifically, it's not a fix-all solution because the marketplace is intertwined with the Israeli market. So the salaries there are significantly higher than the neighboring countries. So that means Palestinian talent can never compete on price because people can just hire a Jordanian or a Lebanese person or an Egyptian for half the price. And if they go to the Far East, people will be even more affordable. So that reduces a certain amount of manual or automation work that Palestinians would have access to. That is both challenging in terms of what work can you bring, but also the perception outside, because people think, oh, it's outsourcing, it's cheap. So they will struggle to find work. But even if they do find work, you face another challenge, because if all the best minds in Palestine are working for foreign companies or even leaving the country to go work elsewhere, who's there to build the Palestinian private sector? No one. So it's very challenging, like within Palestine specifically, but also in a global space. It shows us that it's not that straightforward, because dealing with Palestinian talent forces you to look at them in a different way. You can't see it as charity. You can't see it as cheap outsourcing. You have to acknowledge the quality of the work and the potential that people have to bring you. But that then questions the whole structure in terms of, why do I as a Danish person deserve this salary when somebody in Palestine can do the same work, but I'm paying them less because it's outsourcing? So it has layers to it. The human side is one thing, but of course, if we're talking more BDS and which products to be using, that's a whole other thing, because once you start pulling that thread, everything starts unraveling. Because where do you draw the line? What can we accept and what is ethical tech? I think big tech during the past 2 years has really been exposed as something not ethical. And for me personally, one of the reasons I wanted to build a career in tech in the first place is because I came from a fashion background and felt that the fashion industry was too unethical on a number of levels, and that with tech, I had freed myself of that. But now I think most of us feel a little bit differently about that.
Yeah, we do feel trapped. But again, focusing specifically on your work and within Palestine, you see, compared it to some of the work, a lot of well-intentioned work, I would say. They focus on training, the workshop, there are a lot of short-term support and intervention. But what I like about what you are doing, you actually chose to build, and again, what you mentioned about that infrastructure. You focusing on infrastructure. So why did you feel that training, why did it all felt insufficient to you? And when did you realize that without access to the real market Palestinians have and people in that part of the world, without actually building that capacity, it risks becoming another form of containment, which has been going on for a very, very long time?
So the challenge is that the entire ecosystem is either directly or indirectly funded by aid. There's not a genuine private sector funded by the government, at least in terms of like the tech ecosystem. Everything is somehow linked to foreign aid. That was very clearly exposed.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but is it because there is no viable government down there? Is it because there is no viable institution down there?
Look, there is a government and they have funds that they can deploy in various capacities, but how they choose to spend their money, I think you can probably find some very talented political analysis that can explain to you how people feel about that. Generally speaking, there are funds, they are being deployed in certain areas. Taxes are being collected and people are being paid from those taxes. So there's certainly something happening, but it's not focusing on the private sector as such, at least not the tech ecosystem. But when it comes to building that ecosystem, obviously the different players are taking whatever funds that they can get. And unfortunately, those funds come with commitments and limitations. So whatever foreign players want to emphasize and support will shape what can be built in Palestine. And the ecosystem players are doing a phenomenal job navigating that. and doing what they think is best for the ecosystem. But that means that it's not necessarily built on demand, but also what is available to them. So over the past few years, I've seen a big shift where there's less duplication of efforts and there's more of a pipeline being built, figuring out how do we bring people from university into their first job or into the training programs, and the training programs becoming much more diverse in terms of the offering that they have. And then from there, getting people into their first job. I think that's where the big struggle still is. People are trying. There are different initiatives that have, let's say, networking, upskilling, soft skills development type focus to help people do better in job interviews and to land a job. There are people that run trainee programs. There are various funds to support train to hire or internship programs. But because it's coming from a training perspective, that it's not built into the programs to secure jobs for people. It comes from an educational background and not that strict recruitment tech background. There are players now entering the market focusing on that. And of course, when we say Palestine, there's a number of issues that you're facing with regards to labor law compliance, sending money to Palestine, making sure that people are online at the right times because unforeseen things can happen. But everyone within the ecosystem is working very hard on addressing that. And there are solutions in place. But I do think we could use more people like myself, because right now it's very focused on the individual. And indeed, the best way to help Palestine today is to hire individuals or release freelance gigs to individuals. But sometimes as an employer, at least that's what I see with the startups, you don't necessarily want to go and hire a fleet of freelancers for a short-term project, and you would rather have a team or an agency. And that's where we can come in and fulfill that need. So rather than having to say, oh, I need to look for 3 to 5 different people with different skill sets that I have no way of really validating whether they know what they're doing or not, teams can fix that. And we are trying to do that as Olives and Heather. There are software companies doing the same. And one of the initiatives by Gaza Sky Geeks now is also really pushing for more team formation to see how we can employ more people in different ways. So for us, the advantage is the team comes in, does work for them, they do the work, and we try to facilitate their growth and make their lives easier. And then it falls on me and the people working on the main Olives and Heather brand to figure out everything else to do with compliance, money transfer, sales, business development, marketing, all of that stuff. And it is a mouthful. It's a lot of work, but this is the reality. And I believe that if we set an example, we can inspire others to do the same. Because up until recently, I would say, this is just a number that I'm assuming based on what I'm hearing, let's say 9 out of 10 Palestinian outsourcing companies prior to 7th of October, and we're talking traditional software outsourcing, 9 out of 10 would have been heavily, if not fully, dependent on the Israeli tech economy. So that means after 7th of October, when deals were lost and people lost their jobs, companies went out of business, they had to start from scratch with looking towards other markets. And that's where the big focus is right now. And we have from day one been focusing on other markets. Yeah.
And mapping this business model, which I feel is firstly so visionary and at the same time very complex as well, because it involves multiple stakeholders, and having that centralized, or what you call that core idea around where this is all going. And this is where your time at Gaza Sky Geeks, I think, is very, very important, where the theoretical element and the reality, you combine it together. So what did working inside Gaza Geek? And I want my audience to know a bit more about Gaza Sky Geeks and your own understanding of how you were able to close that gap between the global tech narrative and the lived experience of the Palestinian professionals. Again, was there a moment there when Olives and Heather, you felt it is more than an idea? It is actually a necessity. And I love the complexity of the business model, which you briefly touched upon.
So in my previous job before Gaza Sky Geeks, was running an agency within an agency. So I learned a lot of the hard skills there in terms of contract negotiations, bookkeeping, financial procedures, all of the boring stuff that business owners have to deal with. So I already knew that I had the base skills to one day create my own agency if that's what I wanted to do. And then working with Gaza Sky Geeks, we had, I can't even count how many different programs or even sometimes just smaller interventions that were being run, which all required marketing, whether we're talking pitch decks or donor presentations or full campaigns or recruitment campaigns, whatever you can imagine, we would have to do that. And when I came in, I inherited 8 individuals that did not work together as a team. So I had to define roles for everyone, build the team, build the processes so that we could actually work together in a way that when I left, the team knew how to handle any incoming request and that nothing would get dropped. And for me, that was my biggest pride because I saw that I was able to do that. And I was able to do it with a local team because when I first started, there were conversations around, do you need extra capabilities? Do we need people from outside? But we were able to do everything and they were able to continue without me afterwards. So I see that as a great success. And from there, the idea started with Olives and Heather that, hey, I could possibly do this outside Gaza Sky Geeks and work with founders and Palestinian startups, not just, one NGO. And I would say I spent the first year after leaving Gaza Sky Geeks to just validate the idea because I was very against duplicate efforts. And I did not want to come in as this, maybe perhaps perceived overqualified person from Europe that could take away opportunities from local talent just because people would look at me and think, oh, you can probably do it better, so we'll give it to you instead of someone else who's just as capable. So I was treading very carefully and spending a lot of time just understanding the players in the ecosystem, how they're positioning themselves, what kind of work are they doing, what are the big gaps, how do people feel about marketing support in general, and is there even a need? And I've had more conversations than I can count with founders, literally asking them, do you need my help and support, or is it already here? Is there something that I'm missing? And what I noticed was that within the Palestinian ecosystem, you have 2 types of agencies. You have the big, well-known ones that have global brands like Coca-Cola and Pepsi that they're selling to Palestinians. Those will charge premium prices that no small business or startup could ever afford. And it's also not interesting to those agencies. And at the same time, because they're focusing on selling to Palestinians, they don't have the expertise to help a small business grow outside Palestine. And then on the other hand, you have a ton of small agencies. I used to joke a lot that there's as many of them as falafel shops because there's really a lot and they're very qualified, but they're small and their focus is helping mom and dad shops and restaurants sell primarily through social media. And this is just not going to cut it when we're talking B2B tech SaaS solutions, which is most of what you will see coming out of Palestine. So there was very much a need. And it was very hard for people to access that outside Palestine, whether it's due to not knowing where to go or the cost or whatever. So that's where I tried to fit in. And we kind of grew out of that space.
So it took a lot of study and a lot of research before you actually set your own way of doing things. But coming from a marketing professional, and again, coming from a marketing discipline, we all know marketing is trivialized. But in reality, it's about visibility, it's about legitimacy, it's about access. So when you were insisting on building the full marketing, the funnel, the lead, not just about the content, what went through your mind in terms of the power, in terms of the agency, in terms of who they were, as a Palestinian individual, as a Palestinian team? What were you trying? What were you thinking when you were designing that approach for the Palestinian teams and for the Palestinian startups?
So it's definitely a big question mark and people will give you different answers to it. So I can't say that my way is the right way. It's just a way. But in my experience, solidarity opens doors, but it doesn't close deals. So over the years, I've kind of been going back and forth on how much do we lean into the Palestinian narrative? How much do we focus just on the quality of the work? And I would say where we are at now, the story the team members and their abilities and everything they're experiencing, it's the storefront. It attracts people, and even people that don't necessarily think, oh, I want to support Palestine. Maybe they're just looking for a agency in, let's say, the Middle East. They like that there's heart in the brand. And for some people, I would even go as far as saying they could care less whether it's Palestine or something else. It's just a CSR box for them to tick. But at the end of the day, the fact that they have an interest in us because of it, it's important.
Yeah.
But it's not the reason why people choose us. We can maybe bring them in because of the story, but we then have to wow them with our abilities and the results that we drive. And that's the only way. You can't win clients and win in a global context if you're not actually doing the work. Now, on the other side of that, it's also a balancing act to get things right, because I don't ever want any of the team members to feel exploited or that their vulnerabilities or personal stories are put on display for the sake of us getting clients. So there's many things I could tell you or write about on social media that would shock people, but I choose not to because I think it's undignified. And anything I do share, especially if it's people's stories or pictures, I will always get their permission first because I don't want them to feel that they're being used. So maybe a month ago, we wrote a story with 3 of our Gaza team members where we wanted to display what their daily life is like. And in the end, we decided to AI generate images that looked kind of cartoonish because we felt that a real photo would have been too vulnerable. So that's a big part of it too, right? Like it has to be real and authentic, but it cannot be emotional porn.
It's also a lesson away from the extractive model and romanticization of a problem which you are seeing day in, day out, but also trying to make it work. So, my last question before we move on to the next section would be, what, according to you, changes when a work like this is judged by performance and conversion, removing everything from sympathy? It should be about the performance, it should be about the quality of the work. So what, according to you, what you are doing changes going ahead in the future?
To be honest, I feel that our best projects have been with people that come to us for results. The ones that come with solidarity projects, they can be very demanding to navigate because there'll be budget constraints, perhaps donor demands, or even just a bunch of different opinions on how things should best be solved. So for us, the easiest projects and the best projects have been the more commercial ones. And in all honesty, that's also where we find the biggest amount of dignity, because people look at you as an individual, a professional, an expert, rather than somebody that you're helping by giving them a chance to work on your social media, for example. So I think for us going forward, we will not really change anything. We're going to keep talking about the stories of our team. I will keep sharing my very real experiences in Palestine and opinions on different things. But at the end of the day, focusing on the capabilities of the team members and their dreams and aspirations and the amazing work they're doing, I think that's probably the most important part. But we can't do one and not the other. Like we have people as well that would tell us, don't even mention that it's a team of Palestinians. Just talk about the work. But that's also not dignified because it's part of their identity. And as my colleague Anwar said, yes, I'm Palestinian and I'm a refugee, but it's not everything that I am. But it's an important part of my team's identity. So it has to be there. It cannot be ignored and it can't be everything.
And this has to be learned really well. And that brings the question around impact labor. Because when we talk about the work you've put in, the work we put in terms of space like this, it is emotionally charged. I won't be able to comment in terms of how well it gets paid, but again, we know the narrative. And in an environment like this, it is overexposed. And, rightly you explained to us how you had to improvise on what stories gets told and how it gets told. So how do you guard Olive and Heather becoming, because more and more eyeballs are getting to Gaza and Palestine. So how do you guard Olives and Heather becoming a system that benefits, again, this is very important, benefits for the Palestinian futures, if that makes sense. That is very, very important. Building building a base for them, for the future generation as well, future startups, future marketers to come in and make sure they carry on the legacy of what you're trying to do.
I do think we're in a very unique situation because I'm not Palestinian. So we are automatically excluded from a lot of global opportunities that are intended to benefit Palestine, even though the company is and the team is Palestinian. And at the same time, because we work in marketing, I would argue that it is tech adjacent, but we unfortunately also don't qualify for a lot of global initiatives benefiting the tech sector. So we kind of exist a little bit in the corner on our own, which in some ways is very challenging when it comes to things like funding or even just exposure and opportunities. But on the other hand, it also gives us the freedom to really do things the way that we want to do them. So generally, I have a vision for how I would like things to grow, but I would never make big life-altering decisions that would affect the team without consulting them. So for example, the types of clients that we work with, like we can't accept just anyone. And if anyone is controversial and falls outside the scope of what we agree is acceptable, I would discuss it with the team, and I would rather forego an opportunity than risk their safety or even just upsetting them in terms of their own political beliefs. So there's a space to navigate in that regard where the team is very heavily involved. And then externally, we lean into the local tech ecosystem as much as we can. And we have built this company really on a foundation of partnerships, both local and global. So understanding what's happening on the ground, seeing where we can fit into different initiatives, whether it's helping with curriculum delivery and doing trainings, whether it's doing research papers and help educate people outside about what's happening. Any kind of support that we can give, like we have to be there, and we also have to be shaped by what's happening. So if somebody brings a new project that would somehow impact us or that it would align with what we're doing, we want to see how we can create synergies. Like if I travel, for example, and attend conferences, I'm not just looking for potential clients or partners for Olives and Heather. Anything that benefits Palestine, I want to pass that on in the system. And at the same time, even within the company, I also do spend a lot of time talking to the team about their role in paving the way for others to come. It's not just about them and their salaries here and now. Our success is going to be the success of future generations. So as we grow, we have to think about always keeping a certain quality and reputation so that people will trust us and we can keep growing and hiring more people. But we also have to build the pathway for them. So whether that's partnering with different, let's say, internship programs or even co-creating trainings, like we want to do that. And it's also, honestly, it's a dream of mine that we get to a point in the future where we would have the capacity to do pro bono work for Palestinian founders, because they really do struggle with access to flexible funding that they could invest into their marketing. Usually it will go towards salaries or building the product. And we would love to help them grow more than what we're currently able to do. And at the same time, I'd love to also pour it into training to say that rather than having a short 3 month training program where you can come and do an internship with us, we can offer paid traineeships so people can work with us for a year on real projects and really learn the craft. And then either we absorb them into the company and hire them, or we can help place them in job opportunities internationally or within the ecosystem. But I see our role as something that's continuously evolving. But the reality is right now, we primarily act as an agency and as an active player within the ecosystem.
Yeah. And with a great vision, I would say, Kathrine. And I just want to sort of dig in here where you mention again in terms of this kind of support, which build that sustainable ecosystem for individuals, for startups. When you mentioned about the diverse, and you also mentioned about the qualification. I mean, let's shed some light on that when it comes to Palestinians. What are we talking about when we talk about diverse group? What are we talking about when we talk about the qualification and the qualified individuals you have around you and what you see day in, day out?
So generally, Palestinians are amongst the highest educated in the region. So the literacy rate is close to 100%. And it's not uncommon for you to meet 80-year-olds that speak English. Like my landlord was an old man from Jerusalem, 80 years old, and he spoke English very well. I don't think I can say the same for my 80-year-old grandmother. And Denmark is amongst the countries that speak English the best. You find a high command of the English language. People are highly educated. 70% or so will attend university. And you will find that people have a very wide range of skills that they can deploy digitally. So when people think about hiring a freelancer, don't just think about hiring a developer. There's any skill you can monetize online, you'll find Palestinian talent that can do it. Whether we're talking voiceover artists, accountants, graphic designers, anything, there's a Palestinian who can do that job, and they will do it with an eagerness that you will not always find in other places. So I would say that's partly the diversity. And then when it comes to the population itself, people might think Palestine is a homogenous group of people, but the reality is you have multiple religions, you have multiple cultures, and everything is shaped both by family tradition and the location that you're based in. So even for us at Olives and Heather, I take great pride in building a team that's not just the, let's say, cultural elite from Ramallah. We try to hire people from all over Palestine to have a full representation of the Palestinian people. So Christians, Muslims, people from villages, people from big cities, people from Gaza, and people from Jericho, like people from everywhere. It's important to me that we represent the full population. Palestine has a lot to offer. The talent has a lot to offer. They just need an opportunity to show you.
I love the contextualization in terms of how you spend your time there. You've really understood the fabric of that place, despite sort of, making your way in. But I think it's doing something really, really inspirational. And again, you operate across English, Arabic, across different expectation of professionalism as well. So what do you think how does language shape that trust in that market? And how does it reveal about what do people assume about you, Kathrine, when you talk to people out there? And again, I know you've spent a lot of time there, but I'm sure let's look at it on a more sort of a personal level and the work you represent.
Well, look, as a blunt person, the first perception that you encounter in your life, regardless of where you go, is that you're stupid. So first you have to prove to people my IQ is not that low. Like, please give me a chance. And then the second part is being a woman, which again, in a global context, means that people expect you to kind of take a back seat and not be pushy. And I think most people will find that quite opinionated, and I don't have time for nonsense. Yeah. So that would be the second thing. But in a Palestinian context specifically, Palestinians mostly encounter foreigners that are either diplomats or activists. They don't meet many people that really come there to try to understand the culture and meet them where they're at. So the most common thing I experience is that people are surprised by how well I understand the culture. I don't speak Arabic well, so I have to wow them with my cultural references. But people tend to grasp that within 5 minutes, that I do get you. I understand the situation, and I'm talking to you like an equal. I don't think I'm better than you. I'm not here to give you something. I'm here to create with you. So I would say that's probably the first big hurdle to overcome when it comes to doing business in Palestine. But generally speaking, Palestinians are so friendly and so open and so good that even if there is a misunderstanding or a misconception, I can only say that I feel like people always give me the benefit of the doubt and want to see the good in me and my efforts and in other people that are there too. So I've never felt anything but welcomed and included. And especially because my experience has been unusual compared to the average diplomatic NGO experience, I feel very grateful that people have let me into their lives and into their families the way that they have. So really getting to experience everything that life has to offer there, from olive picking to Ramadan and funerals and weddings and everything else in between.
And I think you're having obviously the two battles here, obviously your own battle and the representative battle as well, where you are making sure Palestinian designers, strategists, the technologists, they've got to be taken seriously outside as well. And you're doing that in an environment which is so unstable. And again, if you look at some of the theories around leadership, we talk about how stability is almost a guaranteed. We assume stability. Of
Mm,
course, we all know, for a fact that Palestine offers none. So now let's dig into your leadership. So what was
mhm.
leading teams? And again, please be open. And this is a space where we could talk about anything under the sun. But what was it leading teams under this uncertain? Not at just personal level, but you look outside as well. How does it feel? And you bring the stability from Denmark. As an individual, you've seen, but then you come into Palestine, where people themselves, day to day, they're literally counting how things are going, what's happening. So, what was it like bringing the two of the worlds? If that makes sense.
Well, I'm someone who leads with the heart. And I
Yeah.
think if you bring that kind of genuinity into work, that translates very well and gives you a bit of a benefit when it comes to then on the other side demanding certain standards. So when I deal with my team, they know that professionally, there's no excuses, there's no slack. We have to meet a certain standard, and that's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And some people might think that I can be a perfectionist or a hard ass sometimes, but that's the demand and the expectation in a global ecosystem. But at the same time, I feel like the people in the team, they like that challenge. They like to rise to the occasion, and it's not something that they're used to experiencing. They're used to being often micromanaged or not being given the opportunity to think outside the box. So finding that balance and showing people it's okay to fail, and I expect you to try. I'm not just going to tell you, go and do this and this and this. And more often than not, you'll find me saying, I can't be bothered to check in on you doing this and that. Like, why do I have to do that? And then people will actually not want that either. People want freedom to do their work. And most people in the team, in fact, I would argue all people in the team will be hired to do one thing and will grow into another role because it's supposed to be a platform for personal growth and development. Like no one should come in and sit in a box and that's all they do.
But do you think? Sorry to interrupt. But do you think there's a before we move on? But do you think there's a very quiet politics as a leader? There's a very quiet and there's a bit of a politics in insisting on excellence from people, which again they're not used to, if that at all applies in this context. But as a leader, are you strategic in how you go about this?
I think you always have to be strategic about it because
Mm-hmm.
you can't, if you think, usually I would say I start with complete freedom and then I reduce it to the point that's comfortable. But there's also a threshold for like how involved can I be in terms of like making sure that something gets done. But at the end of the day, I treat my team the way I would treat a hire from France or from Denmark or anywhere else. So I don't assume, oh, you're going to need micromanagement or you're going to need this and that, because I assume that everyone in the team wants to work hard and prove themselves and do a good job because I see that everyone talks that way. They want this as an opportunity to prove not only to themselves that they're great at what they do, they want to build a career and they want to prove also to the international community that Palestinians are capable. So I feel like it's actually very well received. I think if I didn't have that standard, people would react in a different way because they would feel like, are you pitying me? Like, do you not think I can do better? Like it's a balance, right? You give praise where praise is due. I try to be very public about praise for when people do well, share positive feedback from clients, all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, when people don't do well, they need to improve. And they also need to understand it's not personal. Like you are still a great person. The work you did was not good enough. Also knowing your capabilities, it doesn't even meet your normal standards. So how do we fix this? I
That
approach them
totally
like I
makes
would any
sense.
other person. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
I would say where
absolutely.
the big challenge is and where things are different, it's when you deal with people's personal lives. Because of course, like any leader, people have a life outside work. And whether we like it or not, they will bring it into work. So in a European context, that could maybe be my baby is sick, or my dog has run away, or my grandmother passed away, or whatever big life event that you want to insert. In Palestine, it's my friend was killed, or my house has been destroyed, or I was not able to reach my house last night and I had to sleep in a car between two checkpoints. So these things are obviously of a very different scale, but you as a leader have to find space to make room for all of that anyway. And you can't sit there and look horrified and tell people, oh my God, and then just have a whole meltdown. You have to stay strong and proactive and try to find a solution while still holding space for that person to talk and acknowledge that that's the experience that you're having right now. How do we adjust according to that? And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is insane and at times almost schizophrenic that you're having a conversation with somebody in Gaza right after the ceasefire broke the first time. And you now don't know, is the war back on? What's happening? And you're talking to this person who just started a new SEO project, and you have to ask them, what do we do now? Do I bring another person on this project? Do you want some time off to see how you feel? Like, what do we do? Because I could go in and make the decision for them, but at the end of the day, I want it to be their decision and I will do my best to accommodate. And those are crazy moments. I think most people would pull the plug and be like, oh my God, no, we need to find somebody else to do that. But it's not just about all the horrible things that are happening. Sometimes people need that gig or that project to stay sane. It's not just about the basic survival of like, I need money to survive. It's also, I need something to distract me, or I need to feel needed, or I need to feel valued and appreciated. And that's the only thing I feel like I can really give the team, especially the Gazans in that moment, is to reassure them you have a place in this team, whether you take this project or not. I want to find a solution that works for you. I'm here if you need me. You can always call me. If you don't want to talk to me right now, that's also okay because I respect your personal space. But X, Y, and Z will need to get handled. The rest we can deal with later.
This is so human, Kathrine, so human and so nuanced in terms of how you've put it out for us, in terms of how people assume things and how people process things and, in terms of the experience. So it is very rightly when I say, I can attribute the word professional rigor. This is also a form of resistance, isn't it? And it seems to unsettle people outside. But then when you work with a group of people who go through this day in, day out, it does make a difference, isn't it? It makes a difference in a lot of ways we can't even imagine sitting outside unless you start working with them, unless you start interacting with them and have that connection on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's crazy and different, and I don't know how to even explain it to my friends outside, even people that have lived in Palestine or Lebanon or been in the region. Most of them will never understand what this reality is like. I feel that the best people I can talk to about like, this is my experience, are other founders in Palestine. And we do spend a lot of time also talking about these things because our struggles are so unique compared to what people outside would experience. But at the end of the day, there's still experiences that we need to find solutions for to move on because we don't have the luxury of stopping and saying, well, that speed bump I can't get over because no one's coming to remove it for you or to fix it. We only have ourselves to do that. So we have to keep going. So whether we call it resilience or professionalism or whatever, it doesn't really matter. We have to move on because we must.
And you bring your own personality to this, Kathrine. So thank you so much for that. Let's now move on to our quick fire round. I'll be asking you again. Very simple. Again, one word, or you could complete the sentence for us. But let's see where we get with this. So, one emotion you think you can associate with a meaningful work?
Pride.
Pride. Okay. Thank you. Now, one thing, again, as a marketer, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, one thing you think global market always misunderstands about Palestinian talent?
I would say othering. They make the assumption that Palestinians are different.
Now, a word you hear when opportunity feels just out of reach?
Frustration?
One assumption about impact work you wish was outdated?
That you have to choose impact or financial stability.
Now, this is my favorite one because it's coming from someone who knows this. Marketing matters because, complete the sentence for me.
Marketing matters because without it, your business will not succeed.
And my last one question which every founder should ask before claiming they're making an impact.
I don't think there's just one question there. I think you have a lot of soul searching to do before making such claims.
Thank you so much, Kathrine. Again, not just for your work, but being honest and how clear you were in explaining so many things to us. And what's also important and what has stayed with me is you're talking about distributing that opportunity, not as charity, making sure it works on the context, on the ground. Because when we are talking about Palestine, especially when people are denied the market, they're denied the pathway. And of course, with that comes the future as well. And what Ollis and Heather is actually doing in Palestine is actually sort of rewiring how global system should be looked at. And it's very important to those who are listening. Don't just ask how we are supporting the Palestinian talent. Please ask why access had to be built outside the system in the first place and what failures of power policy and market made that necessary. So if you're listening while carrying uncertainty on your own way, please remember this: dignity is not something you earn, it's something you deserve. And up until next time, please keep questioning, keep caring, and keep building in the Broken Bazaar.